All right. That perfectly set the stage for this next panel discussion on balancing energy and climate in the face of AI. So the biggest bottleneck in the AI supply chain may actually be the energy to power those data centers. This panel will discuss the enormous power demands of data centers now and in the future, how the grid is responding, and the implications for the climate. So I'd like to invite, well, they're already here. Good job, guys. Eric Masanet from UC Santa Barbara, Brian Guzek from Duquesne Light, Mike Kramer from Constellation, Param Singh, who's going to be our moderator for the day. Unfortunately, Emma Strubel, they are sick today and they're not able to make it. But I do want to put in a quick plug. Emma Strubel's group is doing amazing research, and they have a student that's actually going to be presenting their research at the Research Expo during lunch today. So even though we cannot have Emma Strubel on the panel today, you can still see their research across the hall. But in their place, we have Margaret McGill, who is the Director for Policy Engagement here at Carnegie Mellon and for the Scott Institute, who's going to offer some perspective on where AI and energy sits in DC. So with that, Param, please take it from here.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here with you today with what I think is the most fascinating and urgent topic for us. You would have seen this by our wonderful keynote in the morning here is at the intersection of AI and energy. And this panel is about managing AI's energy demand and climate change, or climate goal that we are looking at. I am Param Singh. I am Associate Dean and Professor at the Tepper School of Business in Carnegie Mellon. At Tepper and across Carnegie Mellon University, as you will see throughout the Energy Week, we think very deeply about the opportunities and challenges presented by this AI revolution that we are seeing. And there are few challenges that are as complex and as pressing as the energy needs of this AI revolution. From training large language models, and more importantly, from powering these real-world applications, particularly during the inference phase of these models, the amount of energy that is needed, it has almost positioned AI as one of the largest consumers of energy or electricity in the digital economy. And let me give you a story or an example that I saw a few months back, and that actually gave me a pause to how we should be thinking about this whole problem and how complex this problem is. In July of last year, in Northern Virginia, in a place which many of you may know of as the Data Center Alley, more than 60 data centers suddenly dropped off the grid. And what was going on? It's like 60 very massive facilities went off the grid, which were really running these AI workloads, and they went and moved that workload to their backup generators because there was a small voltage fluctuation at that time. And you can imagine what it means. About 1.5 gigawatt surge disappeared suddenly. This is almost like a city worth of power just disappearing suddenly. And this was really devastating for the grid. The grid operators barely avoided a blackout. Yeah, and this is something that is being talked about as like these AI energy shocks that are going to happen, and the amount of energy that data centers are going to use, and the fluctuation in their need for energy that can lead to grid instability and so on. And why this happens? Because our grid was never designed to handle these really hyperscale AI facilities to begin with. And this is a big challenge that we are facing, even as consumers of regular electricity as well. The issues that will come from use of our grid for powering up these AI data centers as well. And this incident is not isolated. It's a warning, essentially. Across the countries, as you will see, utilities are now scrambling to respond to this AI energy shock. And we have heard few numbers by now in terms of how much energy is needed to power these data centers. And we are going to talk a bit about these because these numbers tend to vary. They go anywhere from in the next 5 years, we're needing like this amount doubling or tripling in the next 5 years. In the last few years, we have been using about, for the AI data centers, we have been using about 2 to 3% of the US electricity. And the numbers are expected to become almost 10% to 12% in the next 5 years, by 2030 or so on. And some expectations are they may go even up to 15% or so. So what does it mean? It means we need to have more power generation, the generation that we don't have right now. This is almost amount of power that we need to generate, which could power whole of California. And that would be probably on the conservative side. So then comes the issue in terms of how are we going to power this? And there are very, very interesting and very sort of extraordinary responses that we are hearing already. For example, you guys have probably already heard of this restarting of the Shutter 3 Mile Island nuclear reactor to power Microsoft data centers. Then there are companies, tech companies primarily talking about energy parks, where they want to co-locate their their AI infrastructure right next to clean energy resources that they are building and that will power directly their data infrastructure. And interestingly, now we are also hearing that this may not be sufficient. So some companies are now, utility companies are talking about restarting decommissioned fossil fuel plants to power this. And what does it mean for the climate goals that we have? So where is this energy going to come from? That is going to be a big issue that we'll be talking about itself as AI adoption grows. And as we find more and more use cases, a lot of companies are still struggling with use cases for this AI. When we find more of these use cases happening, you can imagine the energy growth going, energy requirement going even more. And that is kind of the issues that we'll be talking about. We are at a cross section. We have to ask these questions. Where will this power come from? Can our grid keep up? That's even a bigger question. And how do we meet these demands without compromising our climate goal? In the next about 40 minutes or so, we are going to explore 3 major themes, and we have experts precisely on those. First theme would be how much energy does AI require? AI require really? Like how much is it? What's real? What's hype? What's next? Let's get to hear from experts on that. And how is the energy system responding? Can we actually even generate this much energy? And can our grid actually transmit that? Those are big questions we have to think about. And what does this mean for the climate? Are we actually going to give up our net zero goals? Or we need to figure out solutions to do that? I'm thrilled to be joined with a phenomenal group of panelists, leaders in AI, utilities, clean energy, sustainability, policy, and so on. But before we jump into our discussion, I would like to invite each of them to introduce themselves and share how their work connects to this complex, rapidly evolving AI and energy intersection. So let's start with you, Mike.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mike Kramer, Vice President of Data Economy Strategy at Constellation Energy. What's data economy strategy, you might ask? It's a group we created to really provide thought leadership around powering solutions and the challenges that Param was talking about. Relatively recently, only about 6 months ago, because we're seeing these continued trends in the industry that make you need to understand what is real, what is not real, and what are the right powering solutions to make that happen. If you're not familiar with Constellation, we're the largest owner and operator of nuclear assets in the country, also the largest generator of emissions-free power. We also have a large commercial organization that does wholesale and retail sales to customers. We serve 3/4 of the Fortune 100. So as a strong participant in terms of producing the power, understanding ways in which we can provide those power solutions to the data centers is a big part of what we're looking at. A couple things that I think are important. I'll keep my remarks pretty brief because I think the Q&A is the most exciting part of the conversation, is how do we think some of these things are going to evolve. But one of the things we're looking at very strongly is how does nuclear pair well as a data center solution? And the reason why it would is because it's 24/7 reliable and clean firm. That's pretty similar to the load profiles we're talking about for a lot of these large data center loads, and also allows you the opportunity to potentially site those data centers pretty close to the generation facilities. If you do that, you're solving for a number of problems in terms of system costs You won't have to build as much transmission, allows you to leverage the generation that's on right now and figure out ways to best leverage that. Couple things that I think are important when you think about nuclear as an option for data centers. The first is right now we have a strong existing fleet that operates, our fleet operates at 95% capacity factors and are coming up on relicensing dates. And so one of the things you want to do when you think about these assets is make sure they're there for a long time. You don't want to have examples of prematurely shutting down those plants and then trying to figure out if you're going to be able to restart them. This provides some long-term revenue certainty for those assets. In addition to that, you can take those existing assets and add more to them. So when we talk about new as a potential option, there are a couple ways in which we can do that. The first is we can restart 3 Mile Island. That's our project and as the Crane Clean Energy Center with a partnership from Microsoft to have the offtake on the energy side. You can uprate those existing units. And we've said there's about 1 gigawatt's worth of uprates in our pipeline that we could potentially add to the grid. And both of those are relatively near-term options. The 3 Mile Island example is 2028 that you can get 835 megawatts of 24/7 reliable nuclear power. Can't do that with a lot of new build solutions in that time frame. And that's one of the challenges when we talk about how quickly we need the power is the difficulty in getting new things built fast. It is one of the challenges we need to work through to make sure we can power these new solutions. And then lastly, as you think about like longer term solutions, Lucia talked about the ability to add nuclear to the grid in terms of new build. One of the things that we provide is sites that are really good locations for that, right? If you put new nuclear units at existing sites, you have the infrastructure in place there, you have the community support, you have the skilled workforce, and there's certainly synergies associated with having the nuclear workforce and the nuclear infrastructure in place to build new units there. So that might be a longer term solution, but it's certainly one that's of interest. The last thing I'll say before we pass it along and get to the Q&A, hopefully sooner rather than later, is the core question here is how much of this data center growth is real and when's it going to come? I think there's two things to think about there. One, there are a lot of duplicative requests out there. You see people put in utility service requests for multiple projects in different locations, just trying to make sure, when can I get power? Lucia talked about the need for power quickly is a big goal of the data centers. Come on fast, meet the AI needs as quickly as possible. It's certainly a national security interest for us to do that. And so you see a lot of that. And then the second is you don't know how quickly some of these things can get built. There's still questions out there in regulatory and policy space. There's certainly constraints as it relates to supply chain and labor forces. And so trying to understand the shape of that curve and where the solutions are for that, I think is going to be a big part of the conversation this morning. So with that, I'll pass it along.
Well, thanks, Mike. Good morning, everybody. I'm Brian Guzek. I'm actually the Vice President of Corporate Strategy at Duquesne Light. I'm not sure who the partner for Helios Climate Ventures are. So, Daniel, if you're trying to get me a promotion, I appreciate it, but I'm very happy at Duquesne Light. So the team that's out there, don't be concerned. I have the privilege of representing Duquesne Light here on the panel, the public utility. As some of the teammates around this table are more focused on their business, maybe more national or more footprint. We're right here in Pittsburgh. We serve 620,000 customers. 30 years ago, we served 620,000 customers. So we are a dedicated public utility that really wants to be that trusted partner. And when we think about some of the benefits that we provide here in Pittsburgh, I love Daniel's view around being the Silicon Valley of the future here for AI and for clean energy. We have an opportunity to really leverage our resources here in this region. Duquesne Light's invested billions of dollars over the last 4 years. We will invest billions more in the 4 years to come. But that's not just short term. Hundreds of years ago, we've invested in this area to support heavy manufacturing, to support those steel plants that have been here and that have since gone. So we do have areas within our region that we can really educate and direct some of these data centers to be able to support. So other utilities that may have challenges with the transmission grid, we feel very confident that we will continue to serve in the years to come. We're investing in technology like dynamic line rating and other GETs that allow us to maximize the transmission infrastructure we have in place today. So we're really excited about the opportunity, not just for the data centers themselves, but think of all the businesses that will then come and then build into this region because there's a foundation of data centers. Before I pass it over, I also want to be clear that not every data center creates an issue and not every issue is a data center. So if you think about a lot of these data centers, AI, they're general terms that are thrown around. The smaller 5 to 10 megawatt data centers, if you're out there and you're thinking of your business and investing in upgrading the infrastructure that you have today, we're ready, willing, able, excited to serve you in that 5 to 10 megawatt range. I think what we're talking about here is the hyperscalers. You heard Google, AWS, some of the big 5 that are out there. These are massive demands of power. So I was kind of doing the math in my head when Lucia was talking about some of their generation that they're locking in, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, 400 that adds up to like 600 megawatts. One facility can be 900 megawatts. So just to put things in a perspective of the massive scale that these are, I mean, that would be, we serve 620,000 customers. That's like adding another 200,000 customers to the region. So just for everyone's knowledge, like not every data center is equal, just like not every AI is equal. There's machine learning, there's generative. So we need to be really prescriptive in the challenges that we're solving so that we all know how to divide our resources to solve the right problems. So I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Hello, everybody. I am not Emma. I am Margaret McGill, joining you from Washington, D.C. I came up for this event, which is a great one. I just recently joined Carnegie Mellon as the Director of Policy Engagement, where I try and take the great research that happens here and try and get some evidence-based policy in Washington, which is, no small task. Before that, I was with the Biden-Harris administration in the Commerce Department, and in a previous career, I was a reporter. So I'm coming to these issues with kind of a varied background there, and I am happy to provide kind of the view from Washington. One thing I would point out is there are not too many bipartisan topics in Washington right now, as I'm sure all of you are aware, but everybody wants a piece of AI, and energy and AI is a particularly hot topic. And so what we saw in the last few years is several bipartisan working groups trying to come together in Congress on here's a strategy that we can all get behind on AI. There was an executive order from President Biden on AI that was promptly repealed. And now this administration is working on their own AI action plan, which Carnegie Mellon contributed comments to. So we'll be excited to see where that comes. I believe it's coming in July. But more broadly, I think it's important just to know that in Washington, people are really interested in this topic, and they're especially interested in the energy piece of it. I've seen several hearings already about grid reliability and the importance of improving transmission and modernizing the grid. Where is all this power going to come from? So it's something that's really of mind. And I think because it's a little bit more of a bipartisan topic, while there are some clear breakdowns, I think there is more room there for some sort of path forward that everybody can get behind, because there's definitely agreement that AI is important, U.S. leadership in AI is important, and making sure that AI has the right power is important. So the devil is in the details, but I think it'll be an interesting area to watch, and I'm happy to answer questions if I can, trying to explain Washington. And with that, I will hand it over to Eric.
Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Masanet. I am an energy systems modeler and a professor at UC Santa Barbara. I also hold a joint appointment at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, where I and my colleagues have been building models and studying the data center sector for nearly 20 years now. I feel like an old timer every time I say that, but we've been at it for about 20 years. And I thought I would provide just a little bit of history on the power and energy use of data centers in the US. And keep in mind, the U.S. is the epicenter right now for artificial intelligence and the growth in data centers that we've been talking about so far. So a lot of what we're talking about today kind of harkens back to the early days of data centers. So in our very first report for Congress, which came out in 2007, so nearly 20 years ago, there were a lot of similar concerns. Data centers were proliferating rapidly, energy use was growing, and indeed we found that data centers, their energy use doubled from, a small percentage of U.S. electricity use in 2000, doubled by 2005. And many projections were that doubling would continue and we would see constant growth off into the future, leading to very high estimates of data center energy use. In our second report, we noticed something very interesting, that between 2010 and around 2017, data center power in the US and even globally started to level off. It wasn't quite flat, but the growth was very small compared to the previous decade. What happened? Efficiency really kicked in. We saw a lot more efficiency developments in hardware. The cloud came into being, which is a much more efficient way to host workloads than in your local data center. PUEs came down and so forth. We're now in sort of a third era. So our most recent report came out just before Christmas, and we showed that mostly due to AI, but also growth in conventional data centers, electricity use from data centers in the US has risen from about 2% to around 4% now. And we have projections for the future that suggest strong growth may continue. So we are in a place where it makes a lot of sense to start thinking a lot more carefully about growth, what drives it, where it's headed, are there mitigating strategies that we could put in place today? But I wanted to sort of maybe just make 3 key points from my perspective that I think will be useful for the conversation. So the first is, we've heard a lot of numbers already, right? I just mentioned some, Param mentioned some, we heard some throughout the day. Just know that all of these numbers are modeled estimates that come with a lot of uncertainty. So we don't have official statistics on the power or energy use of all AI data centers, right? No one reports that. Some companies like Google are quite good and give us their total energy use, so we have an idea of directional trends, but every number you see comes from a model with a lot of assumptions, and we face a lot of data gaps. We also are active in the modeling community, and I can say that, compared to other modeling communities like the buildings or transport modeling community, it's a bit of a wild west when it comes to modeling and estimating data centers. We don't have intermodel comparisons. Everyone has a different model. The assumptions really drive those numbers. And the other thing is that a lot of the models don't consider constraints. I'm really glad Mike mentioned that when we look at the load growth projections coming from utilities, there's potentially a lot of double counting in there from data center operators putting in permit applications in different locations and then ultimately going with one, right? Analysts don't really have insights into those sorts of issues. There are constraints related to supply chains. I've heard like the lead time for getting a new transformer is something like 18 months now, right? We don't even know that when these new data centers will be built. For example, Meta's announced a 2 gigawatt campus in Louisiana, right? Humongous potential power load. Will that be built to full capacity? When will it be built? Even if it's built to partial capacity, how often, what capacity utilization factor will be there? There are lots of uncertainties when it comes to these numbers. But one thing to keep in mind is, we don't have to let uncertainties prevent us from acting today, right? There are a lot of things we should be doing. And in fact, a lot of policies have been popping up over the last year or two in reaction to the directional trend, requiring more transparency, clean power, and so forth. But do know, we need to get a sharper view of this sector, and soon by addressing better models and data gaps. Second key point, and Param mentioned this, and I'm really glad that he did, is when we zoom out to the global level, or even the national level, the power and energy use of data centers may look kind of small, right? 1 to 2%, 2 to 4%. It's a very different view at the local level. You mentioned Northern Virginia, where, Data Center Alley, huge proliferation of new data centers. The people there are seeing, new fossil fuel generation come on, clean air issues as a result. A lot of the commitments by large data center operators are for renewables and SMR. Those are coming down the pike, in 5 years, maybe 10 years, right? In the meantime, we're adding more fossil fuel capacity, mostly natural gas, but more fossil fuel capacity in very local contexts where people are feeling the effects today. So we have to be careful to distinguish between the big picture and what that number may tell us about the overall sector and the local effects. The third thing is that one thing I've learned is that this sector changes so rapidly, and it's really difficult to make projections out more than a few years. Why is that? Hardware gets more efficient, applications change, demands change, and so forth. So it could be that, the strong growth we're seeing now for the next few years is locked in. That's possible. But what might the growth look like, beyond 2030 or even off into the future, right? There's still tremendous potential for innovation. We heard about that in the opening plenary. New materials, new hardware efficiency, new cooling technologies, the software and modeling algorithms that are out there for training and inferencing models. There's a huge opportunity for making those more efficient. So we need to have a lot more insights into what those drivers may look like. So far, what we think is that, this balance between efficiency and demand, 10 years ago, efficiency was winning and demand was starting to level off. Now demand is far outpacing efficiency, but it doesn't mean that efficiency won't bend the curve in the future. So I think, we need to be thinking about that as well in the near term, and also what those effects could be in the long term, and just better understanding what their potentials are and the investments we need to bend that curve, beyond 2030.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Eric, I'm going to start with you on, particularly because you are one of the few researchers who is really digging into the big picture energy impacts of AI, as well as you have written this report. And you already highlighted that there are few blind spots that we can't trust most of the numbers. We don't know what are the assumptions and so on. Could you talk a bit more about what kind of data or transparency do we actually need to close all these gaps and cover the blind spots out there?
It's a great question. And I would say even though we have uncertainty, it's clear in the near term there's strong growth. All the numbers are clustering at moving up, essentially. My colleagues and I wrote a paper about this topic, and there are a bunch of stakeholders who could help in providing better data. But a key one is the industry itself, data center operators. Some report their total electricity and power use, which is great. A lot don't. We often don't have insights into how those data centers are used, what capacity utilization they're used at, what kind of hardware and services are happening at those data centers. These are the granular details that modelers like me need to understand in order to make better projections. The good news is operators are becoming more transparent. They're starting to share more. I think they're realizing that it's in their best interest to be a bit more transparent. There are policies coming down the pike that are requiring data centers to report more details on their operations. Some key things that we really need to know is if we think about all these announcements, and they're coming out like every week, a 500 megawatt campus in Saudi Arabia, a 1 gigawatt campus here and there. We need better longitudinal studies of these announcements and when these data centers are built and what capacity they're actually utilized at and what energy sources they use. So some of these numbers are out there, but we also don't have a community of scholars like other fields that are collecting and sharing those data. And lastly, I'll say that utility providers and energy providers also have some insights that researchers don't in terms of the numbers of permits and locations and whether they come to fruition. That could help us just better calibrate our models about today and make better projections moving forward.
Thank you. Let me go to you, Mike. Like you have spoken about nuclear energy being a strong solution for powering AI data centers. Now the expectations that is out there, we need somewhere around like 40 to 50 gigawatts of energy very soon. Is there sufficient nuclear energy, and can we get to that this quickly in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the time gap is the biggest issue with that. When you think about when the energy is needed, which is in this 3 to 5 year range, and when you could build new nuclear, I think the most aggressive estimates are around 2030. You heard Lucia talk a little bit about their deal with Kairos and what does that look like. Their first units are expected in 2030. And I think if you talk to others across the industry, some of them are trying to be more aggressive, but in general, early stage, first of a kind around 2030. And then when you're talking about doing it at scale with gigawatts worth of new nuclear, it's probably more in the middle of the 30s, which doesn't solve this problem. And so it might be the required long-term solution when you think about our climate and sustainability goals and the want for clean, firm energy to support these data centers down the road. But there does need to be some sort of interim bridging strategy. We can do some things. So I talked about the about 2 gigawatts or so that Constellation is doing between the restart of 3 Mile Island and the potential to add another gigawatt or so of new nuclear via uprates. But that doesn't get you 20 gigawatts. That's 2. And there are others in the industry that can do uprates, and there are a couple other sites that are being restarted. So I do think nuclear plays a role in the near term. But the idea that you could build new nuclear fast enough to support some of these things is going to be a challenge. So I think you need to think about other solutions that can help you bridge there. It shouldn't just be build new gas as the option there. I think there are a number of ways in which we can get at it. One of the things that I think is pretty important, Eric talked a little bit about the data that we have. We know these data centers look different depending on what their use cases are. So the report that they wrote is great, but they do break down the difference between what's a cloud data center versus an inference data center versus a large language model data center. And so with some of that uncertainty, what you don't want to see is an overbuild of infrastructure that spreads cost to a number of different customers and results in a bunch of stranded infrastructure, right? That's not the idea here. I think the idea here is how do we get the most data center demand on the system without causing adverse impacts to others? Flexibility is one way in which that could work. There was a Duke University study that was released about a month ago which showed that if you could just curtail 0.25% of the time, and that's not even full curtailment, that's a partial curtailment, you could put 70 plus gigawatts worth of new load on the system. Just to think about like how much do we really use of the existing infrastructure. Brian talked about the ability to make it more efficient by enhanced grid technologies, but the existing grid today in PJM here, it's 90% about 2% of the time. So 90% utilization about 2% of the time. So we're really not talking about many hours of reliability concern. You're talking about a small number of hours to get some of this data center load on. And then just, another stat, 65% utilization, 20% of the time. So most hours of the day, this is not a problem. So we need to figure out the best ways to pair all these different solutions together. Can you be more flexible? That doesn't even need to be the data centers. That can be other customers. That can be the use of peak shaving technologies like battery storage. So there are a number of ways you can get at that. I think nuclear is part of the solution. You can do some of that in the short term, but you have to come up with some of these other things as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Brian, now I have a question for you because I am one of your customers, as probably half of the audience.
Thank you for your business. We appreciate it. And thank you for not calling yourself a ratepayer. I don't think, a lot of times people refer to the utility customers as ratepayers. They're truly our customers, so appreciate that.
Yeah, your customers. And that brings me to an important question that I'm thinking about. If we think about where is the energy going to come, the two major sources that are talked about is one is nuclear, another is natural gas. And if natural gas turns out to be a big player from where energy would be coming, then Pennsylvania could play an important role given our deep natural gas assets. If that turns out to be the energy source, and what I'm hearing from earlier Mike as well, a lot of the companies would want to put their data centers closer to the source of the energy. And if these data centers are put in Pennsylvania as a result, is Duquesne Utility Light Company and so on, are they actually ready with their grid and the updates on the grid to be able to handle that kind of a load? And who is going to pay for these upgrades that happen on the grid? Is it customers like me, or you're going to charge the companies which are going to use this technology?
Yeah, there's about 7 questions in there, and I'll do my best to answer all of them. I think the first piece, and just leveraging what Mike said, and even a little bit with what Eric has said as well too, is that it truly has to be all the above. And I know that term's thrown out a lot, but that's not just nuclear. It's not just natural gas. It's not just virtual power plants with batteries. It's really, we have to leverage all of the skills, knowledge, resources, abilities that this region has with the students and the startups to really leverage all of that and minimize the load. And you've heard of Jevons paradox before too. So even though we get more and more efficient and the plateaus of the curve, we'll use it more. Right? So if you think about AI, if it gets super inexpensive, a lot of the businesses will start investing in those use cases more. So that we don't think that load's ever going to go away completely, right? So I think that's some of the piece of that. Moving on to are we ready? We're investing billions of dollars to make sure that we're ready. We're planning 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. We have constant conversations with PJM, the 30 gigawatt shortfall, now 40 gigawatt shortfall by 2030. So we do have to act now. And that takes all of us, the consortium. It just can't be the private sector. It's got to be public-private partnerships along with support from the local government, the state government, and ultimately in Washington. Paying their fair share is an important piece of this entire conversation because part of I'll be a little, the lie between the liars and the buyers is what we like to refer to it as in joking, but the data centers that are out there that are putting in these requests in multiple service territories. So they'll put it in Pennsylvania, they'll put it in Texas, they'll put it in Minnesota. For one resource, you have probably 6 to 7 utilities studying that, looking at that. Can the grid handle that? And why that's important is because what's incentivizing those data centers to invest? They're looking for the fastest, and ultimately sustainable place to invest. And in our region, and the way our tariff is structured is that if you come in to our service territory and you're a Google, you're an Amazon, and you cause an upgrade requirement for our transition system that could be upwards of $100 million, you have to pay for your business. Where in other sectors like Northern Virginia, all of those customers are paying for that. So policy is incredibly important when we think about protecting the people that we have in this region to make sure that the individual in Penn Hills, the individual in Lincoln, Leamington can pay their electric bill of $80, $90, $100 and it doesn't go to $200 to pay for these data centers. So paying their fair share is incredibly important. And I know we have great and talented people in the policy in our company, and we just challenge everyone to make sure that the data centers are paying their fair share when they come into the service territory. So I think I captured most of your questions, Parma. So again, paying the fair share, we are ready. We're excited about the opportunity, but it does take all of us from all of the above to make sure that we're leveraging all the capabilities that not just this region brings, but we can impact in other areas too.
Thank you so much, Brian. Let me go now to you, Margaret. First, thank you so much for joining our panel at such a last minute. We really appreciate it. Now, given that your experience on in DC, and particularly the whole issue that you said and which resonated with me is the bipartisan support for AI and energy. So what looks like there is going to be, there is a lot of regulation which controls whether nuclear is approved, whether like energy parks can connect with the grid or so or not. So these are a lot of regulatory issues. What's your take on? Are you optimistic that that DC is going to kind of overcome overcome their differences and kind of make new regulation or fix some of these issues for us to get energy?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for, again, letting me join. So the thing about DC is the safest thing you could bet is that nothing will happen, which is also, you know, kind of sad, but it's hard to pass laws. And so with that in mind, I do think that this is an area where, pardon the pun, there is a lot of energy and a lot of interest, but there, I think it will be a while before things really move in a bipartisan way, just because on the Democratic side, there is a lot of concern about some of the actions that have been taken by the administration in terms of layoffs, funding freezes, and I think it is hard for Democrats to want to work with Republicans on legislation when all of that is going on. So that being said, there's still a lot kind of happening on the edges. And one thing I wanted to mention, going back to Eric's point on the importance of actually having the right data, is this whole idea of you can't manage what you don't measure. And this was part of Carnegie Mellon's comments to the White House on the AI action plan. We had a section on AI and energy. And one of our points there was, and I took some notes so I don't get it wrong, was the importance of actually having a real understanding of how much energy these data centers are actually going to use, and having it be standardized. So you have reporting metrics that cover everything from some water usage, efficiencies, I can't remember some of the other ones, but basically everything, and it's uniform, and that could be a helpful role for policymakers to play, and that's not too, I would hope, not too much of a lift. And then the other idea is on the other side, measuring the amount of energy that these AI models take and the workloads, both in the training and the inference, so you have a clearer picture, and that's one that's standard. And then from there, perhaps you can do a little bit more on the policy front. So that was one of our many messages to the White House on an AI action plan, and that I believe that plan is supposed to come out in July, so we'll see how much that is tackled there. But I do think that there is also an interest in permitting reform. That's something that Republicans have talked a lot about, and there was bipartisan movement on that last year. It kind of didn't get over the finish line, but because there's been a lot of work in that space already, I think, and permitting reform can mean a lot of different things, but it seems like one of the biggest barriers to adding more power is all the studies, the reviews, all of these things, and it's all regionalized, so it's a huge undertaking. But I think that's one area where you might see some slow but incremental progress. You know what they say about Congress and progress, but there you go.
Thank you so much for sharing these insights with us, Margaret. At this time, we would like to open up to questions from the audience.
Yeah, so as a tradition, Any students in the room who would like to ask the first question of this panel? Yep.
Thank you for this fantastic panel. I have a question specifically for Professor Masanet, also for everybody else, because some of the, I did one paper about last year on the Moore's Law and whether we are seeing the seeds of whether we can still apply it. So I'm really curious, in your research, have you noticed any trends or findings that you want to highlight?
So sure. So Moore's law for CPUs certainly has been slowing down in recent years, but there's a lot of room for innovation when it comes to AI. Quantum computing, we've been hearing that in the news, is close to a breakthrough. A completely different way of computing that could be much more efficient. Granted, high cooling loads and other things to work out, basically. So it's always a moving target, I think. Optical chips could be another way of really minimizing the power use for every computation, whether it's training or inference and so forth. So that's the wonderful thing about this problem space and this sector, is that the innovation can be really staggering and come quickly, and it's really difficult to make predictions about, what technology is going to be the savior and so forth, just because there are so many parallel tracks of research happening. But I would say, just a better understanding of what those innovations are, where they are in the TRL or ARL readiness level spectrum, is something that we need to get better at as modelers of this sector, because we tend to look at what's here today and make projections based on that versus really diving in deeply to understand the physics and the materials and the innovations behind every computation. That's the domain of electrical engineers and computer scientists and the coding and all that, which is an important part of the energy use. Our models don't take into account very many of those factors right now, but they should in the future in order to get a handle on this sector. But I would say I'm cautiously optimistic about the potential for technology to bend that curve eventually. It's just demand is really, everyone's racing to build, and to seize business opportunities. That demand is swamping the gains that we're seeing presently. And there are some great gains that are already happening with every generation of GPU. It becomes, an order of magnitude times a factor more efficient than the previous generation. It's just we're tending to eat that up in the short term.
Yeah, I'll just add two quick things. One, as you think about with everything, the more you actually do it, the experience you gain, you learn things and you can do that better. So not many folks have built a gigawatt scale data center, right? A lot of the data centers that have been built previously, the 10s, the 20s, the 30s, maybe in the 50s, but now you're talking about going up to scales that haven't been done before. So they're learning as they do that on ways in which they can construct and design those things to be more efficient. Second is I just came from a data center dynamics conference in New York City, jam-packed full of innovative technologies for these data center builders to be using that help either on the cooling side or on the electric side or on the wiring side, or all the different ways in which you can think about that. So I do think there's definitely going to be those opportunities. The real question, you talked about the Jenkins paradox, the need for compute will continue to grow. So it's the efficiency versus the ability to get more compute, how power dense these racks are, and what does that mean for the future of what these data centers look like? I think we'll continue to learn.
All right, we have one more question from a student before we open up to the rest of the audience.
Hi, thank you for the panel. Mike, you mentioned that 0.25% of curtailment of electrical demand will open a capacity to more than 70 gigawatts of electrical power. Is that more so towards the energy that's provided from the grid to the data centers? Or is that kind of like a dual feed scenario? What is the percentage split of the current energy feed to the data centers between on and off grid power to all the panelists? And where do you see that kind of growth going in terms of the percentage split?
Yeah, so on the first question, I'd probably refer you to that Duke University study for a little bit more detail on what that looks like. They did do some geographic comparisons. Eric mentioned earlier, geography really matters here. You could put, just putting an extra 20 gigawatts in one location isn't going to work with that 0.25% of curtailment. That's a nationwide view of the overall system. So you'd need to break apart how much in PJM, how much in ERCOT, how much in these various different regions makes sense. But the concept is still there, which is that there's unutilized infrastructure that exists today that if we were able to solve for some of those peak hours, we could do that without adding new generation or new transmission, both of which can be long lead. So when we think about the time constraints and the need to get AI on sooner to win the AI race, that's one of the things we'll have to work on. The second question was, sorry, I'm trying to think the best way to answer. I'll pass it. So the,
I think my mic might be dying. I'll try to yell really loud. All right, thanks for the save there. From off-grid, on-grid, you talked about, Lucia talked about wanting to be on the grid because of the resiliency, the reliability, the value that the grid provides. That continues to be the first analysis, so they want to be on the grid first. Off-grid creates a challenge where the data center operators, they don't want to be generation operators. So getting an independent power producer to be able to commit, to be able to do that off-grid, making sure that load's going to be consistent. It's a long-term commitment. I would say that's probably secondary. They're doing it for speed. So in an ideal scenario, to Mike's point, if we can start to really minimize the strain on the grid long-term, and we can have dual purposes where they have that base load to invest in new generation for that site, and then we can leverage that new generation to smooth out the curves in other regions. I do think there's an opportunity for a true both win scenario of having some of these big data center companies with billions of dollars to spend to invest in some of that base load generation in the short term to eventually also invest in some of these sustainable technologies in the future. So short answer is most of it is grid now, starting to analyze that off grid because of the queue, but I think there's a way to optimize both in the future.
All right, I think we have time for one final question. We're going to hit that side of the room.
Hi, this is a great panel. I just wanted to ask how all of you think about the climate piece in this. There is a myriad of expertise, departments, and interests in here. So how is the previous government and how is academia and private sector and the grid thinking about how this race can be negotiated with our climate goals as well? Thank you.
Okay, I will start on the policy front. I think we are in, to understate it, a time of change in terms of what our policy goals might be when it comes to climate. And one of the things that I find pretty fascinating about some of the debates that are going on is where you see interesting breaks that aren't related to party lines. So I'm going to take a kind of a narrow answer to your question to point out that there are many Republican districts and states that are benefiting from the clean energy tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act. They are creating new jobs and new industries, new factories, new manufacturing. There was just one plant an EV, I think battery plant that just opened in a Republican district in Georgia. And so with that in mind, these members of Congress are seeing good impacts to their economy because of these clean energy investments. And so you've seen many of them, to be precise, 21 of them, so maybe you can decide if that's many, say we want to preserve these tax credits in the reconciliation process to their other Republican members. So I see things like that as signs that there is interest in clean energy and in that form of trying to stave off climate change. So that does give me some hope there. So that's just one small little piece on the policy front. Thank you.
From a Duquesne Light perspective, our strategy and our vision still remains to drive a clean energy future for all. And we firmly believe that a strategy for decarbonization is through electrification. And I don't think that's changed. And we should never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a quote unquote good crisis when we think about the demands and the amount of attention. I mean, 5 years ago, I don't know if there's team members from Westinghouse in here, nobody was talking about nuclear. It was like, we don't even want to talk about that. And now all of a sudden, that's really all you hear, small modular reactors and nuclear and this carbon-free technology. And the dollars that are going to be invested today are going to position us to be able to do that from the future. Even combined cycle plants from a gas perspective, they're not looking at it just getting that combined cycle plant in and running it the way it's run today. They're looking at it thinking, okay, how do I take this and potentially allow for expansions in hydrogen consumption, and then taking the gas, stripping it, creating hydrogen, and using carbon capture on the gas itself. So in my mind, yes, you may not hear about it in the now, but this climate, no pun intended, is giving us an opportunity to invest in a more thoughtful way about making sure that we meet our goals for the future. So I'm incredibly excited. Some of you may have heard, I've lived in Pittsburgh my entire life. My kids are fourth generation in the same township. I have pictures of the skies in Pittsburgh from the 80s where you could barely walk around, and seeing what we've come to today. And I'm just incredibly excited about this community, this team, and really being pioneers to make sure that we protect the climate here in the future to come.
So Brian stole some of my answer on the nuclear piece and the interest in nuclear and how excited people are, and the opportunity that this moment gives us to create sustainable future. And one of the ways in which we can do that is by focusing on that and getting the opportunity to do things like restart nuclear plants, create and invest in new technologies that help us with sustainability goals. So I think that's one thing. The second is we've all seen impacts on climate, and it's not going away. I think our CEO likes to cite a recent study where the time it took to raise the Earth's temperature 6 degrees was like most of human history. And then the next 6 degrees are like in less than 100 years. And I'm not doing the study justice, but the concept is still the same, which is the climate impacts aren't going away. So we need to be thoughtful about what those things are as we move this forward. And then the last thing is we're fortunate that a number of the big hyperscalers do have sustainability goals that they believe in. And so that gives us the opportunity to partner with them to come up with innovative solutions, to figure out ways to do this where it's not just, go add more fossil fuels. There is going to be some of that, right? This is an important moment in time to make sure that we get AI right. So we have to be thoughtful of some of the trade-offs, as well as the all of the above strategy that might get us through the next couple of years. But you can't do that without having sustainability in mind and thinking about the best ways to do that for both the short and the long term.
Great. Well, on that uplifting note, I just want to say first, Param, thank you so much for moderating such a great panel. Mike, Brian, Margaret, and Eric, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. And everyone, please join me in giving them a round of applause.